Thanks, Ethan. Okay. I'm Mike Makovsky. I'm the president and CEO of JINSA. Thank you very much for joining us today. We have a very distinguished panel of retired senior U.S. military officers to discuss what's been going on in the war with Israel and Hamas and the region in general, and President Biden's trip to Israel. So let's get right to it. Start with you, General Votel. Let me explain who we have, of course. We have General Joe Votel. He's a very long, distinguished military career. His last position was the commander, excuse me, of the U.S. Central Command of CENTCOM. He also, excuse me, I apologize. He also was a member of JINSA's Generals and Admirals program trip to Israel a few years ago. And of course, we have Admiral Mark Fox, who we've had on other webinars, involved with the number, is a former deputy CENTCOM commander. And Admiral Fox is also involved in, I think you're on Iran Task Force, Admiral, is that right? Or Iran Task Force and our Eastern Med Task Force here at JINSA, and was also a member of our Generals and Admirals program a number of years ago. Let me start with you, General Votel. Thank you very much for being here. And I want to start with you, General Votel. First of all, I think I speak for, I think, a lot of the audience that the impressiveness by the U.S. response by the Pentagon, by the White House to this attack on Israel, and the resupply already of a lot of weapons and ammunition to Israel in a very short order. I'd be curious if you could comment on that, or what you think, how you assess the U.S. response on the military side, and you think some of the challenges they probably face and have overcome to respond so quickly.
Yeah, thanks, Mike, and it's great to be with you, and of course, wonderful to be with Mark Fox again. So thanks for the invitation to be here. Yeah, I would agree with you. I think the U.S. response, both militarily, diplomatically, politically, has been good. It's been there's been a real sense of urgency to it, and a real focus on it. And I think we're seeing that evidenced right now with the presence of our president in Israel as we speak. As I kind of look at this, I think there were, from the military standpoint, I think there were 4 key tasks that we needed to focus on. And I think this is where we have been focused. First and foremost has been posturing. And of course, we've seen the movement of carriers. We've seen other organizations and other things move in there. So we've seen that. That's very evident. That's very much out there. And of course, that's been complemented by a lot of our diplomatic posturing as well, to include the president, the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, a new special envoy for humanitarian assistance, Ambassador Satterfield. All these are really important parts of posturing. Second of all, it's really been focused on containment. I think one of the big concerns from the beginning, from a military standpoint, is making sure that this doesn't expand more broadly across Israel, or on Israel's other frontiers, or really across the region. And so a big part of that posturing and the narrative, the information operations that are going along, have really been focused on that aspect of containing, and sending very clear messages to actors like Iran and other groups that fall into their ilk, that we would not tolerate this kind of expansion. Third is protecting ourselves, protecting American interests in the region. We've got a lot of businesses, we've got a lot of contractors, we've got a lot of troops, we've got a lot of places. We got to take care of that. And then fourth has been this, as you mentioned, the support to Israel, making sure that in cases where they need some resupply or some assistance with arms or equipment, that's taking place. I'm almost certain we're doing a lot of work in the intelligence arena here with them, not just through the military, but certainly through our intelligence community. So I think our response has been very well organized and very deliberate. And I think the urgency with which you've seen the administration, the Pentagon, lean into this is only illustrative of how dangerous we think this situation is, and could get more dangerous in the future. So I mean, I think they get a good grade here for how we've responded to this. I think our actions to date have been pretty accurate.
I'm going to want to ask both of you in a few minutes about the other dangers, but let me just have a follow-up, General. On the resupply, look, you were CENTCOM commander, and of course, since you retired, and I remember speaking to you about it beforehand, Israel has become part of the U.S. Central Command's area of responsibility, what is called in military speak AOR. As I think many in the audience know, this was something JINSA had actually advocated for since about 2018. And then before the U.S. was in, Israel was in the U.S. European Command's AOR. Now that Israel is in the Central Command's area of responsibility, how is that, you think, facilitated or not, this resupply, you think, to Israel?
Well, it may be that CENTCOM has very good lines of operation, lines of supply throughout the Middle East. I mean, they use maritime means, we use ground means, we use air means. So there's a very extraordinary network there that is designed to, support resupply. I mean, logistics is the name of the game when you get into these large scale combat operations, and so that's a capability that's well developed. So I'm certain they've been able to leverage that in terms of moving supplies, moving it quickly, being more responsive, using pre-stocked supplies to get to Israel if those are available. So I think there are some really inherent advantages from that perspective. But I think the other perspective is that, as you pointed out, I mean, there has been a maturing of the kind of the combatant command responsibilities here. And while I'm certain there was a very good reason why we included Israel in the European command structure at the time, over time, as the situation changed, as you and many at JINSA have recognized, there need to be a change. And I think the more important aspect of this is this has provided a level of continuity, I think, for the CENTCOM commander to be able to go to Israel regularly, and then to go to other capitals where he has to work issues back and forth. I think this is absolutely critical, and I think it actually brings much more of an integrated regional approach, and it removes some of the seams, artificial seams that we have between our combatant commands. Now, I say that fully recognizing that in my time, I was extraordinarily well supported by General Scaparrotti in European Command, who was the SACEUR, the EUCOM commander. Could not have asked for more. But it is important to remove those kinds of artificial boundaries and really create more of a contiguous approach to how we look at the security threats of this region.
You think, and then I'll turn to Mark. But one last question on this. From your vantage point, could the United States maintain this kind of pace of resupply, or do you think at this point? Or
well, that I think is the big question. I mean, we've got a lot going into Eastern Europe.
yes,
We are stockpiling in the Pacific, necessarily so. And now we have this contingency. And of course, the situation is more uncertain, more unpredictable in the Middle East right now. So it is really tugging the U.S., its supply lines in multiple directions here. And I think this is a challenge. I don't have the detailed insights here, but I've got to believe that the systems are being stressed right now, not just magazine capacity, that is what we can draw out of stocks, whether it's ammunition or other supplies or even humanitarian aid or whatever we have, but the ability to move and get it to places is important. We have a finite number of C-17s. We have a finite number of ships. We've got competing demands in a variety of areas. So, the U.S. Transportation Command and the civilian architecture that supports this, I think, are extraordinary. They're the best in the world. They are definitely up to the challenge. But I am concerned about the ability to sustain this if this turns into another long, protracted conflict, which, frankly, it looks like it could possibly be something like that.
Okay, thank you. All right, Mark, I appreciate it. Let me ask you, first of all, let me ask, do you have any comments on what General Votel just mentioned on this resupply? And then I have some follow-up questions.
No, not really. We have an incredible network and an incredible capacity, and it has a global capability, but it is finite at some point. So I don't have anything really more to add to that.
Let me ask you, and then not to pigeonhole you as just a Navy man, of course. But one of the things that the U.S. has done is move these some carriers and in the Mediterranean. What do you think they're? I mean, is it just a signal to Iran? What do you, or do you think it has other purposes to do that?
Well, certainly, there's tremendous symbolism when you move a carrier strike group in response to a crisis. And then when you have two, that signals even a greater level of response. But the reason it signals it so powerfully is because it's a powerful capability. The carrier strike group comes with its own logistics. So you don't have to figure out where people are going to bed down or where they're going to eat. They already do that. And it comes with its own supply chain. So it's tremendously flexible, and it gives the national security authorities tremendous options when they look at what would we do, how would we do it. And it's everything from, the strike warfare all the way down to humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, non-combatant evacuation capability, things that just give the national security team a lot of options.
Okay, and just for our audience, maybe Mark, if you could tell our audience how many carriers we have and how many are operating roughly at one time.
Yeah, we have 11. The U.S. Navy, have 11 aircraft carriers. There's always one that's in deep maintenance of refueling, and then the others. Typically, you'll have probably 3 or 4 that are either deployed or about to deploy or just returned, and then others in various states of either having just returned or are getting ready to go. To just kind of benchmark, in Desert Storm, we surged 6 aircraft carriers. In Iraqi Freedom, we surged 5, and we could have done 6. So if there's a real crisis, if there's a conflict that we need to, the Navy is capable of generating surge capability if it's needed.
So far, it seems like correct me if I'm wrong, Mark, that the naval forces that we've deployed have been in the Mediterranean, but have we moved anything to the Persian Gulf more? And should we do more than we are doing on?
Well, as I understand it, and I'm not on the inside anymore, but it is an Eastern Med kind of crisis. And that's where I think, that's where Gerald R. Ford is. There's actually talk now of having an amphibious ready group and a Marine Expeditionary Unit, an ARG-MU, activated to go to the Med again. And, prior to this, we had moved additional aircraft and other forces into the region to kind of address some of the Iranian behavior. So to my knowledge, and there are always some residual naval forces in there, but there's not a carrier in the Persian Gulf right now.
Let me ask you, and then General Votel also said, do you think you would be, obviously, as General Votel mentioned, we have commitments and needs, obviously, in Eastern Europe with Ukraine. We got, issues with China and the Taiwan, in the Indo-Pacific. But given what's going on in the Middle East, do you think it would be valuable for us to move some naval forces more in the Gulf to send a signal to Iran? Or, as you point out, the focus has been the Eastern Med, but there is a concern, as General Votel brought up, that this could expand and that could involve the Iranians. I assume that's what he meant. He could speak for himself in a minute.
Well, the beauty of naval forces is you can move them if you need to. You can either bring people from the Pacific, as we've seen, through the Indian Ocean, or you can bring them through the Suez Canal. So depending on what the nature of the requirement is, the need, I would say right now, with a focus on what's going on in the Eastern Med, having a carrier over in the Arabian Sea, or that wouldn't be doing much other than focusing on Iran, and you want the options for American evacuation, let's say, or whatever it is. So that's up to the Central Command commander and the SecDef to figure that out.
Yeah, and so General Votel, I'd like to ask you to comment on that, and also mention that General Kurilla, your successor, goes after General McKenzie, is now just came to Israel also. What do you think? What do you think about? Do you have any thoughts about the deployments? And what do you think General Kurilla might be doing in his visit?
Yeah, I do have some thoughts about the deployments, and as I kind of mentioned up front, I think what we've done is we put some muscle behind our narrative here in terms of this, and we've demonstrated it. And when you try to create a level of a deterrence, there's really two components to that. You got to have capability and you got to have will. And I think we're doing a pretty good job of that right now. I think that's a really important aspect of it. And I could not agree with Mark more than the flexibility, the agility of our maritime forces, these carrier strike groups to move where we need them to be. This is a unique American advantage here, and it's something that is really important for us. That said, I do think, when I think about the Middle East, and I thought about this even before this crisis took place, is that when we look at the array of our forces, we have to look at what a sustainable level of military force is in the Middle East. And it doesn't have to be task forces of tens or hundreds of thousands of troops, or dozens and dozens of ships, or an endless amount of Air Force squadrons in the area. I think everybody recognizes the challenges we have around the globe. But the fact of the matter is that we do have interests in the Middle East, and as we're seeing right now, the siren call of the Middle East can disrupt a whole lot of things, just like it's doing right now. And we're going to respond where we have to respond. Our interest in the preservation and security of Israel is at the forefront right now. Our interest of preventing instability across the region is being tested right now. Our interest in preventing hegemonic control over the region by an actor like Iran is on the table right now. So it's really important that we figure out what that sustainable level of force is that we can keep in the region, and we can rotate people in. We don't necessarily have to base people there permanently. CENTCOM has always been a rotational kind of combatant command, and we know how to do that, and we do it pretty well. But we have to figure out what that is. What I am concerned about is that our little bit of seesawing back and forth here on lots of troops, no troops, lots of troops, no troops. I think it. While we are very flexible, I think it in the minds of our partners, I think it represents some unpredictability, some uncertainty about our level of commitment here. And I think it is important for us to figure out what that sustainable level of support is in the region. And I don't know exactly what that is. I'm like Mark, I've been out of it for a couple of years here, but I'm sure people are thinking about that. And I think it's really important to identify what that is.
Mark, do you want to address that same point, please?
Well, the only way I would amplify that, one way for naval forces to kind of multiply their presence, if you will, is the construct of forward deployed naval forces, FDNF. And you see that in Japan and in Indo-PACOM. That's a really good way of, rather than having the tyranny of the Pacific to deploy, we've got forward deployed forces in Japan. We have a small presence in Bahrain, and we've got some mines. Well, I don't know what they've got now, but they used to have minesweepers and a small footprint of some, forward deployed Coast Guard and, patrol boats and that sort of thing. Small. One of the things that the Navy has done is to forward deploy destroyers into Rota, Spain. And so that's another means, and in fact, they're increasing that. That focus is really the ships that go over there are ballistic missile defense capable ships. And so you've just eliminated the whole transit in the Atlantic to have a group of ships that are now in Rota, Spain. That would be another thing to think about as we go forward. I know that the Greeks, we've got good rapport with them. That would help. So that's another way to sort of multiply existing maritime forces if you actually forward deploy some of these different capabilities.
Let me ask you on one, and then I'll ask Votel the same. But one of the bases that we use is El Udeid in Qatar, and the Qataris have, of course, been in focus in the last, since this all began with the Hamas attack, because Hamas is one of the leading champions of, Qatar is one of the leading champions and funders of Hamas. And of course, in recent years, you had the Israelis, I think at times encouraging, facilitating transfer of money from Qatar to Hamas because they thought it would be useful for stability of Gaza. Obviously, that hasn't worked out too well. The Qataris put out a statement I thought, stood out in the region after the attack on October 7th, putting sole responsibility on Israel. The UAE and the Bahraini you mentioned, I know you were also, I should have mentioned, you were also commander of the Fifth Fleet, of course, based in Bahrain, but Bahrainis and the UAE put out statements, but then they put out more modified, in my view, I think more improved statements. I haven't, unless I missed it, I don't think the Qataris have done that. So there's a lot of grumbling, sorry for this long question, about Qatar. And so I personally think we should be holding them, partly putting them on the line about these hostages, for instance. How do you, maybe you could explain about the importance of Qatar, of El Udeid, or do you think that maybe the U.S. could also consider other bases or building other bases in the region? Because the Qataris have often played a double game, frankly. Al Jazeera is based there. They're friendly with the Iranians, but they're helpful to us in Afghanistan. They're pretty shrewd on how they operate, I think.
Yeah, I think that's the way I would probably characterize how Qatar has gone forward. They've been shrewd.
Yeah.
They built Al Udeid. It wasn't U.S. Milcon that built Al Udeid, and the CENTCOM forward headquarters is in Qatar. And so that was a way of ensuring that after we had taken all of our CENTCOM assets basically out of Saudi and we put them in Al Udeid, I don't see that it's a realistic lift for anybody to build new bases in the Middle East with U.S. money. And the reason that Qatar shrewdly, with deep pockets from the Pars natural gas field, they built Al Udeid as a way to play us against the rest of the neighborhood. And you're right, Al Jazeera, Qatar is not a large nation. I mean, they're a pretty small nation, but they've got Al Jazeera, and they poke their neighbors in the eye frequently. You never see an Al Jazeera report about the deep dive inside of whatever is going on in Qatar. It's always somebody else.
Yeah.
So they've been shrewd.
Yeah, I don't know, General Votel,
Yeah. I
obviously dealt
mean,
with
it
so.
certainly is an interesting neighborhood, isn't it? And I think Mark actually, you and Mark actually nailed it there with your comment about how shrewd the Qataris have been. And you know, to my knowledge, I don't know that they've necessarily put any restrictions on us as a result of our support and other things for Israel. So again, this just really just shows how complex the political machinations are here with all of this. In that, I do think the important thing to look at is what role countries like Qatar, Egypt, Jordan, UAE play in the long term. Maybe in Qatar in particular, you know, at some point we are going to have to address. You know, Palestinian political leadership and the future of that. So it would seem to me that you know an approach that would be through some of these partners here to kind of help with the formation of that. I don't know exactly what that looks like, but there certainly are some things that can be done, and I think the so-called shuttle diplomacy, the movement around the multiple leaders going in there, is to keep everybody engaged in the conversation right now, and level intelligence. I mean, I think we're seeing a lot of that right now with the discussion ongoing over this explosion at the hospital.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, there's a rush to blame Israel, and then some facts come out, and so, you know, I think a really important part of our networking right now, our connections, our diplomatic and informational effort is to really level the battle, level the information environment on what is happening out there, who is doing what, and making sure that everyone is kind of operating from a common framework. And I think that's important. And I think once we do that, I think nations like Qatar, who have been good partners to us, and as Mark said, I mean, we got a lot invested there. I've spent a ton of time in that country, and they've got a lot invested in us. We have to look for more constructive ways to get them involved in really addressing the more pressing, sustained problem that we're going to deal with here.
Let me just have a follow-up about Qatar, because I do think it's a country that's going to be already gotten attention during this crisis, and I think we'll get more. How much, General, do you think that they need us? As you said, they have a lot invested in us. They're kind of afraid of the Iranians too, right? I mean, they need us, don't they? I mean, and how do you perceive? I don't want to put words in your mouth. How do you perceive what they need from us?
I think what they need is they need our continued support. They need our continued relationship. You know, I'll just take you back a few years. Mark will probably remember this, when Saudi Arabia and the Emirates and Egypt and others had a big fallout with Qatar, and they were pretty much isolated in the area. It was the relationship with the United States that I think kind of helped with that took several years to resolve, but we stayed steady on that. We did not diminish our relationships with them during that. We kept all of our bases. We operated all of our aircraft, all of our activities out of those areas, and we insisted that the partners to the north and the south, particularly the Saudis and the Emiratis, support that. And when there was a scheduled exercise and they tried to exclude the Qataris, we chose to step back from that in those cases. That, hey, we're not going to allow this to happen. So, I mean, this is they do need us because we do provide a level of I don't want to use the word top cover because that's not the right way of thinking it, but it's that idea, a level of support for them that I think is important for the you know, kind of the unique role that they see themselves playing in the region. And I think that is important to them. I think they will pay attention to the United States, and as we move forward, I don't think they're completely independent actors here, but they are, I think, beholden to us, as we are to some extent to them.
Let me ask about two specific areas now. One of the issues is in this crisis is the issue of U.S. hostages. Well, hostages in general, of course, taken from Israel, and the numbers aren't exact. We don't know fully. It seems like, but number are American citizens also that have been taken hostage by Hamas in Gaza. What do you think right now is going on? I'll start with Mark and then General Votel. Mark, do you think what is going on? Obviously, it seems like explicitly U.S. forces are in the carrier in the area, partly maybe it seems like to help. If U.S. forces are needed, of course, I imagine Israel would like to do this itself. But if it's U.S. citizens involved, and America wants to send its soldiers to help out, I'm sure Israel will accommodate. How do you see what's going on behind the scenes? Probably.
Well, having Israel in CENTCOM is an enormous help in terms of you've already got the touch points and the framework of cooperation and understanding. And, just as General Votel said, hey, UCOM did a great job, when Israel was part of UCOM in terms of supporting. But it really, I think, having Israel as part of CENTCOM is a good step just in terms of having the special operators rub antennas and to be able to talk to each other in a normal way and to share intel. The Israelis are really good. And one of the real advantages now of having maritime forces is that sovereign U.S. territory at sea, and you don't have to ask anybody's permission to have that capability nearby. And it also avoids the perhaps inflammatory thing of having American troops visible, someplace else. So it just gives you a lot of options here. I would expect that there's a tremendous amount of intel sharing and understanding of kind of the facts on the ground. And of course, Gaza is a beehive of tunnels, and it's just a maze, I think. And so it's a really, really hard mission, both to plan and execute. So, but I fully expect that there's a high level of intel sharing and cooperation that's going on right now behind the scenes.
General Votel, you're nodding.
Yeah. So, if someone had asked me 2 weeks ago, who are the two countries in the world who have the most mature, well-developed hostage rescue capabilities, thought processes, architecture to support this, my answer would have instantly been the United States and Israel. So, to Mark's point, you've got the right people involved in this, not just with the tactical organizations and the operational approach that is necessary for successful hostage rescue operations, but certainly in the United States side, and actually more fully developed, hostage rescue response capability that's nested into our national security process, so that reaches out to families, that is, has learned a lot of lessons, is better at communicating, and better at working all of the other angles that are associated with this, to include law enforcement, to include negotiations, to all the back channel things like that. So we've got a lot that is going for us in this particular area. But as Mark said, this is an extraordinary situation here. We're not just talking about a couple of them. I think the numbers I've seen of up to 200, or maybe somewhere less than that, I don't know. But in any regards, a lot of hostages that could be consolidated, that could be dispersed, that could be down in tunnels, that could be in hospitals, that could be on military targets. I just think it's an extraordinarily challenging problem. The most important part of hostage rescue operations is the intelligence development of this. And I suspect this is the area in which there is a lot of cooperation taking place now, not just between our militaries, but between our respective intelligence communities and those of others. We shouldn't forget that there are other countries who have citizens that are hostage here as well, and they have rightful concerns as well. So I hope that there is a lot of collaboration in terms of that. And then, of course, hostage rescue operations are always characterized by speed, surprise, and prepared for a violence of action here, that you're willing to accept a level of risk to go in and get hostages out. And so these are very unique operations, and whether the situation will allow that to develop or not. I think it's always important to make sure we're well prepared for it. I would suspect a part of the force is specifically focused on that problem and that problem alone. And then another part of the force is focused on the bigger issue of what we're going to do in Gaza to punish Hamas and to restore order and protect our sovereignty and, you know, safeguard our citizens things. So in my view, those are kind of two separate things, kind of managed under, you know, some level of national leadership. I mean, I think that's how we would approach it. I suspect that's how it's being approached in this situation.
Let me ask you, by the way, I may add, you know, I know I speak often with the IDF leaders, and over the years, they always said great things about being part of EUCOM. And but once they did become part of CENTCOM, I ask them every single time I go to Israel, and I go a few times a year, what do you think? How's that relationship going? They all say, oh, tremendous. It's like it's been a game changer. It's amazing. The relationship is fantastic between the IDF and CENTCOM. Let me ask you about another possible something that might occur that obviously President Biden has basically warned about. What if there's a conflict between Israel and Hezbollah? Now, whatever we've seen with Israel and Hamas, of course, Hamas is, well, inflicted a hell of a lot more damage than certainly Israel ever expected. And Israel's going to have to do a lot of, you know, soul-searching investigation after this war is over. How was there such a breakdown? But what Israel is concerned, certainly the U.S. is concerned, is that this could get wider. There's been, you know, some incursions from the north, from Lebanon into Israel. You know, there's questions whether Hezbollah really wants to get involved. Are they just probing? Are they just trying to send signals? On the other hand, you know, is Israel maybe possibly concerned that if they go in with ground force in Gaza, then Hezbollah from the north will initiate a conflict? And we, as you all know, of course, both of you know, Hezbollah's military capability is far superior to Hamas's. They got 130,000, 150,000 rockets. They got precision, you know, munitions. What would then you think? Let's say there is such a scenario, and there is a war between Israel and Hezbollah, which there hasn't been since 2006. Then what do you think then our military response might be to do that? You think Israel might need U.S. help? I don't know. I'll start with you, General.
Yeah, I think that does represent kind of a worst case situation here. And of course, you know, if there's a second front that opens up even more than it has already in the north, and you know, and threatens a major part of the Israeli population, and of course, as you've noted here, I mean, Hezbollah is the most powerful terrorist organization in the Middle East right now, and it comes along with a lot of capabilities and better organization and stronger support and more resources to apply to this problem. So it will mean that Israel will have to choose. It will have to choose about where their priority is going to be. They will have to choose carefully on where their resources go. And I think that this could have an impact on the United States and our support, you know, diplomatically, politically, and certainly in the informationally, and certainly in the military realm. You know, whether the United States will get involved or not, I wouldn't speculate on that. That's really a decision for our civilian leaders. We haven't really put any red lines like that out there, other than we've told people not to, don't do this. So I don't know. You know, there are certain things we do. Back to our earlier discussion on carriers and ships in the Arabian Gulf. You know, one of the messages that does send is it does say, Iran, we are holding you at risk. And we are holding you responsible if Hezbollah gets involved, because we understand your relationship. So that is one thing that we could do to, you know, bring the deterrent effect to the shores of Iran, and make sure that they know that there is a price to be paid for their you know, their primary terrorist organization in the Middle East if it gets involved in this thing. So, you know, I'm rambling a little bit here, but I think it would be an extraordinary situation. It would complicate this. Would certainly complicate the American response. And I fear it would bring us, in some ways, more deeply into this than we already are. So,
Admiral Fox, do you have anything you'd like to?
No, I think he summed it up very well.
Okay, let me ask you about one other item. I saw on Twitter just a little bit ago that, again, we don't know 100%, but it seems overnight there might have been a couple drone attacks on, I think, either some U.S. forces in Iraq. Obviously, there have been many of these in the last few years. JINSA, we follow this pretty closely. We've tracked something like over 90 attacks under President Biden on U.S. forces in Iraq and Syria by Iran or its proxies, and we've retaliated about 4 times. My understanding is decisions to retaliate usually come from Washington. They come from the White House on this. Do you think in a moment like this, or something like that, how should the U.S. respond? Do you think we need to be more assertive, or maybe this isn't the time for that? How do you both see that? I don't know. Mark, you want to start, and then?
Well,
You're an airman. Yeah.
This is my personal opinion, and it doesn't represent anybody's but mine, and that is the Iranians only respect force. And back to the key parts of deterrence, it's a capability and it's a political will. And if you have a capability but not the political will, then you don't have any deterrence. We have the capability. At the same time, every administration since, at least Bush 41, nobody wants to get into an open conflict with Iran. I mean, back to Reagan, the tanker wars. But you know, the thing that changed Iranian behavior back in the 80s was a horrible tragedy where an Iranian Airbus was shot down by USS Vincennes, killed 230 or so innocent people. And that was what the Ayatollah Khomeini said, that's the chalice of poison. They finally took their gloves off, and we're going to, this was an Iran-Iraq war kind of thing. Khobar Towers. You can just go down the list of, we didn't really do much in response. The EFPs in Iraq. So in my opinion, there needs to be, we, the US, are kind of tied up in knots sometimes with this proportionality business, where if we know that they have sponsored an attack, I would advocate there needs to be something bad that happens to them that may or may not be directly related to it. To show them, hey, one of those little submarines just sank at the pier. Those are dangerous things. I think that we should have a more muscular response, but at the same time, that's escalatory. And then you have escalation, and then you find yourself into a much higher, so it's a really tough decision for civilian leadership.
Let me ask you, General Votel, if you could also follow up and give me, and just add something that Mark raised, that this goes back to Reagan. We had also the Marine, of course, bombing in Lebanon and Beirut. I don't remember Reagan doing anything, if I recall correctly, except leave. And it seems like the U.S. military, obviously we want to avoid conflicts as much as we can, but I wonder if that message has gotten to the Iranians too much. And it seems like we do tie, to use a phrase that Mark just used, we seem to tie ourselves over in knots on Iran, maybe unnecessarily. I wonder how you think so.
Yeah, I mean, I agree a lot with what Mark said there, and I don't think it's abnormal to be too concerned about Iran. Frankly, I think that they are the initiators of a lot of chaos in this region, and they have a long memory, and we should always be concerned about the things that they're saying. To the earlier question, I think it's one of the things I mentioned up front was kind of these 4 things we should be thinking about: posturing, containing, protecting, supporting. This part of the discussion really is about the protecting part, I think, and it's about making sure that we have the resources to make sure we can protect ourselves here, but it also means that we have to work with our partners on this. So, you cited these little drone attacks or whatever that are likely taking place in a place like Iraq. So I think one of the things we ought to be doing is, firmly but respectfully, is emphasizing to the Iraqi government that, hey, we are here at your invitation and we expect you to stop this. We have to make this really clear, and we have to make it very, very clear to them. We have to make it very clear that we are not going to absorb that, and then we will respond on this. And so I do agree with Mark. We have to get those kinds of response authorities at the proper level. Fortunately, self-defense authorities are, all American troops, regardless of where they are operating, where they always have the right, and in fact the duty, to protect themselves and their units from imminent harm. And so self-defense is always an approach on this. And of course, we don't want to use that loosely. It has to. There's a process for that. But we need to be reviewing these types of things. And then, as Mark said, we need to be willing to back some of that up with some action if it's necessary. We should not tolerate this at this time, because these are instances designed to evoke an overreaction on our part, and we need to quell them quickly. And whether that is done diplomatically or whether it is done militarily, we can choose what that is. But we definitely have to pay attention to this.
One last question, and I know we're getting late already. Both of you spent a lot of time, obviously, in the Middle East. You're CENTCOM commander, deputy CENTCOM commander, 5th Fleet commander. One of the things that's been a shock about this whole event has been, of course, well, it happened itself. The brutality has probably been, the barbarism, I think, displayed by Hamas has clearly been shocking, even for people who had low expectations with Hamas. But that there was a breakdown here on the Israeli side, and obviously they're going to have to investigate that. You've had already a couple senior officers, the J2, that of military intelligence, head of the Shin Bet, say it's their responsibility. You have the chief of staff of the IDF, Herzl Levy, already. But let me ask you, from your perspective, all your experience in the region, one of the things, and Netanyahu's made clear, is they have to restore deterrence in Israel. It's a very rough neighborhood. So what do you think, from your perspective, Israel needs to do that would really kind of reestablish its deterrence in the region? Is it just destroying Hamas, or are they going to have to do more than that, you think?
I think it's an excellent question. I mean, I think how they handle this initial challenge that they have. I won't say initial challenge, because they have lots of challenges, but this challenge right now, I think, is really important, and I think they have to address. I kind of think of this like crisis response and then sustained. And then you move into more of a sustained approach to how you address your issues. I think most important for them is to address this situation and get this under control, and then to shore up their other areas of concern around the country, whether that's to the north or to the east along the Syrian border and some of those areas. I mean, that's kind of how I would think about it. I think the most important thing for them to do in terms of trying to restore deterrence is to be effective in addressing this particular threat, and then I think they have to have an approach that allows them to look with a very careful eye towards vulnerabilities in other areas and make sure they address those as well. And I don't necessarily mean those are military things. They might be intelligence or surveillance things or relationship things or diplomatic things or other things that that allow them to, to make sure that the mechanisms are in place to protect their own interests. So I guess, you got to trust the wolf closest to the cart. And then I think you got to find out where the rest of the pack is and make sure you can defend against them.
Mark, do you have any?
Yeah, at the end of the day, the Palestinian people have not been well served by their leadership. And I think the key is ultimately finding a way to not have somebody like Hamas in charge politically in Gaza. And that's a really hard lift. The Palestinian Authority, before that, the PLO, they're corrupt, they're inept, they're incompetent. They don't, they're not serving their people very well. And so I think, and I'm speaking out of my league, but in a perfect world, you've got to have something that you're striving toward. And this could be a place where the Saudis and for the Emiratis and for the rest of the Arab world to come together to say, hey, look, we've got to do this. But it's this generation of Palestinian leadership has really been completely and totally inept and corrupt.
Yeah. And
so somehow or other, there's got to be a means by which you get a broader way of creating a way ahead for the Palestinian people. And I don't know how you do that, but that's, in my opinion, you've got to have something towards which you're striving so that the Palestinian people can say, hey, there's a life and I've got to do something. Israel left Gaza in 2005 or 6 under Sharon, and all of the aid and all of the things that have flowed into Gaza have gone into tunnels and rockets and mischievous and destructive kinds of activities. Yeah. And they've got waterfront in the Eastern Med. They could be doing something else with that.
Yeah. By the way, I was just going to conclude, but I saw I have a question from one of my board members, Charles Wax, and he had a question, and I'll end here. The siege, or whatever you call what Israel's been trying to do, with the fuel, electricity, they're letting in water, at least in the south, Gaza has some of its own water. Is that an effective military tactic? Is that a good pressure tactic in terms of trying to push Hamas to release some of these hostages, or not?
I think that it is. I think that it is. I suspect that is part of the purpose for when they instituted these, was to try to disorient Hamas, to make it more difficult for them to command and control and do things, and recognizing that there are some impacts on it. And whether this is a long-term approach, I don't know. This will certainly exacerbate the humanitarian situation. And I would suspect, I certainly hope that one of the key things that is going on right now is humanitarian planning, and how we are going to address for the Palestinian, address the plight of the Palestinian people who are caught in between all of this. This I think will be really, really critical. And I over a long period of time, denying critical services like this could really work against the Israelis and what they ultimately want to do in the region. So yeah, there are some tactical advantages to it, but the strategic effects are could be different.
Yeah, Mark, do you have anything to add on that?
I completely agree.
Look, first of all, I want to thank you very much. We're honored to have you both. We want to thank you very much for all your service, of course, to our country. And I want to thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us today. And I want to thank everybody. So I know everybody, we're grateful to Admiral Fox and General Votel for joining us. I want to thank the whole audience, of course, for joining. We've had a number of these webinars. We have a really large turnout on all our webinars on this. Stay tuned, as we have a lot more planned. Unfortunately, I don't think things are going to be ending in the next day or two. So we'll do our best to keep doing our best to bring in analysis and information to all of you. So thank you very much again, General and Admiral. Thanks again. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
See both of you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.